Hello, you guys. I hope everyone's having a great night. Happy Thursday, Friday almost. I don't know what time it is. It might be early Friday morning. Hello. Hello. We're going to talk about the case of the JonBenét Ramsey and what happened to that little girl in that night of that horrible crime that was committed. Um, so I'm just kidding. We're really gonna talk about JonBenét Ramsey, but we're not gonna do it in that voice. But we're just gonna give you a quick preview. We might do in and out voices of the Gru. I call him Gru. But we want to talk about true crime with voices. We want to talk about JonBenét Ramsey and what people think happened that night. Do you think Burke Ramsey was involved? A lot of speculation was that, he could have had something to do with it. So we'll get started. For those who are not familiar with the JonBenét Ramsey case, I was very familiar with the JonBenét Ramsey case because I grew up in the 90s, so pageants, JonBenét was my age. Actually, I believe JonBenét was like a month older than myself. She was born in September, and I was born in October, so we were very close in age. And back in the day, glamour shots were the thing to do because in the 90s it was all about pageants. Pageants were like the thing. So, with that being said, JonBenét was really big in the pageant industry. She wore makeup at a very young age, and that attracted a lot of unwanted attention from, of course, pedophiles. And so when this happened to JonBenét Ramsey, everybody was freaking out. I was at my friend's house and I forgot to tell my mom. My mom had the vacuum salesman come over, and she thought literally that the vacuum salesman stole me because they left and then she couldn't find me. And I just got my glamour shots done, and this is when the JonBenét Ramsey thing was happening. So it was like a huge, huge ordeal. Like, they were minutes away from calling the police had they not found me. And I was just at my friend's house, but still, my mom, being a mom, she freaked out. Anyway, but what happened with the JonBenét Ramsey case? So the night prior, they were attending a Christmas party, and they got back in pretty late. And JonBenét's mother, Patsy, says that she put JonBenét into bed, and JonBenét was prone to wetting the bed. And so she put her to bed, so she says, and that's all she knows. Now the husband, what's his name? Is it John? John Ramsey? I think John, Patsy. Is it John Ramsey? I think so. I can't remember anyway. My brain decided not to work. But they said they had nothing to do with it. They said she woke up, got a 911 or got a ransom note saying leave this certain amount of money, which it just so happened to be the exact same amount that he got for a bonus that year. And it was in Patsy's handwriting. And just there's really some odd circumstances. And also the 911 phone call. They said that their daughter had been kidnapped. It was all panicky at the very beginning of the phone call. And then they hang up. And then it was like silence. Even the operator was like, are you still there? And like you could hear him in the background. Like it went from panic mode to like. So a lot of people speculate that they were covering for Burke. And a lot of people think that they got up in the middle of the night to get a snack, and she ate pineapple. That was the last contents in her stomach. And they got into a fight over something with food or something. And he got mad, got the mag light, and hit her on the top of the head with it. Accidentally killed her. And didn't know what to do, and freaked out, and dragged her down to the basement. That's a theory. That is a theory. There is no facts on that. It's not a factual thing, but that is a theory. I'm gonna set you guys down for a second. I gotta open my Gatorade. Oh yeah, good old Gatorade. We're gonna pause here for a second. I'm gonna still talk to you guys about crime, but let's set you up on this little bit. I wanted to talk about some of the, pause just for a second and talk about some of the drama going around the YouTube community. And I was there and present last night when both of the creators were doing their lives and going back and forth. And I watched MRB for a really long time. And I've been with her from the beginning. I watched her when she had like 1,200 subscribers. Like, it was a tiny amount. I've been there since I was Starlight True Crime. Yeah, that's what it was, Starlight True Crime. I've been there. I watched her from the beginning. So, hold on. Anyway. I watched her from the very beginning. So, I gotta get another drink. With all the drama going on with that, I liked Mommy Ramblings because she did the body cam footage, and had the walkthrough of everything, and everything with the Chris Watts case. And J for Justice, those were my two that started out, and I thought were great channels, I'm not going to bash any channels, and I'm not going to bash any other people that watch these other channels, because, everybody's allowed to title and have their own opinion, and that's great. I'm not going to throw any hate out there. I think some of the drama is just needless. I think, you're grown adults. You don't have to go out on a public platform necessarily, and especially if you're downgrading people. Like, I would never tell somebody go unsubscribe from their channel, from this person's channel. I would never do that, because guess what? That's not my choice to do. That's not my thing to do. So everybody has their own right to subscribe to whoever they want to. But, when it comes to the drama channels and all this other stuff, it's like, y'all, come on now, let's talk about this case. And there is going to be some difference of opinion. I get that. But let's talk about this case and not about behind each other's backs. And let's not, if we said something thoughtlessly, let's say, okay, I'm sorry for what I said, and bite the bullet. Okay, I messed up. Sorry, I said this. All right. If you took it this way, I'm sorry. Just like certain people make mistakes every day. I'm not perfect. I'm nowhere near perfect, but I can sit back and say I made a mistake about something. Because we have to realize that there's thousands and thousands of people that could watch these videos. Depending on how big our channel is and how big our platform is, if we have a big influence on people, that's a pretty big deal. And we shouldn't be bullying people if they feel a certain way about one creator, or if they're in a chat with a whole bunch of other creators, Everybody should at least try to get along, because this is a public forum, This is a public platform. We don't, and unless you do, you can pay like $9.99 a month. But unless you're paying if you're not paying $9.99, you get ads on every channel, this is a public thing. Anybody can post anything. Well, not anymore, because YouTube, you gotta watch what you post. But I just think that all the drama would be avoided if everybody, like, just said, alright, you know, it's not okay if somebody's talking about somebody's channel behind their back and telling them, oh, unsubscribe from their channel, and that's making their channel not grow. You know, because I've often wondered, well, why isn't my channel growing? I'm trying to put content out and I'm trying to do things as much as I can. You know, it makes you wonder, well, how many other channels and people do this behind people's back, you know? I don't ever do that. I don't talk to anybody off of YouTube. There's one person that I do, and we don't really talk. He's just on my Instagram, and that's Duty Ron, and he's the only person I have outside of YouTube that I know that I have on my personal platform. He is the only person that I have because I trust him. I trust Duty Ron. I trust him. I have let him into my family circle because that's the one person that I trust as far as YouTube goes. But other than that, I mean, I watch other people, but I don't have them on a personal level like that. You know, so I think everybody could get along, and I think if you just aren't into the drama channels, you won't be involved into it, you know? And I like Jay for Justice still. I like Mommy Ramblings still. I like Jewels of Thought still. I like, you know, a lot of these channels. I've never been a fan. I was never a fan of Critical K because of all the Shanann bashing that she did. Now, I understand people can change and they can try to do a new image, but let's not forget, this woman was on a hate campaign, and she even brought that out that, you know, Shanann, she implicated that Shanann tried harming the girls. Now, I get that she's trying to backtrack and do all this other stuff. But at the same time, it's like, how can you talk all this horrible stuff about Shanann and then not get very many subscribers, and then all of a sudden you want to flip and change and then say, oh yeah, well, I don't believe Shanann had anything to do with it, and I retract all the videos that I said. Well, then take them down and, you know, just shut your YouTube off, I guess. That's, to me, that would be a way of proving, and come back later. Like, just come back later. Like, turn it off and come back later, because subscribers aren't everything. Have some dignity, because it looks really desperate when you have a subject and you're sticking with it for this amount of time, and then you all of a sudden flop because you see that, oh, this person and this is not working, so I better change my tactic on this so I can get more subscribers, you know. And then all of the different stuff that's come out, it's just clickbait, you know. A lot of it is clickbait. A lot of these channels, oh, mystery of the Watts, there's new information. I still watch Armchair Detective, though. I don't necessarily see a shadow in the videos. That's for anybody else to interpret. That's for whoever wants to interpret. But, you know, I still watch Armchair Detective. He's funny, he's great. I hope people would watch me, you know. I'm not going to discourage anybody from watching anybody. I'm not that type of person. You know, I think that the Rujek family, I think they deserve to have a voice and a platform to speak. And I'm so happy she is writing a book. And I believe that she should have a platform and talk about her book, like have an upcoming thing on YouTube. That would be awesome for her to do, to go ahead and have that kind of platform like that. We're going to go back to the JonBenet Ramsey case in just a second, but I just wanted to hop in here and get some everybody's thoughts and opinions on the whole YouTube drama, the back and forth drama crap. I'm not going to make fun of anybody, because it's not fun when people toy with other people's emotions, and it's never okay for people to cry on YouTube, on both sides. It's not okay for a person to feel threatened, and it's not okay for a person to feel betrayed or hurt or whatever, or targeted or whatever you want to call it. It's not okay in all forms, you know. It could be considered bullying on both parts, you know. That's where you need to look at each other and go, okay, We're not toddlers. Let's not point the finger at each other and go back and forth. Instead of removing the rafter from your brother's eye, or from, no, excuse me. Before removing the straw from your brother's eye, remove the rafter from yours. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's metaphor meaning don't judge somebody or don't point the finger when you got a whole handful pointing back at you. And I'm not directing that at any certain creator or creators. I am just saying there's a lot of channels that feed the drama and feed the trolls. And, I was called a troll a long time ago. And I was like, are you serious? Did you just call me a troll? And one of the chats that I was always in. Like, I was in them all the time. And, like, I'm sitting there going, you shout me out. How are you going to call me a troll? Like, you know my name. Like, I was like, wow. And it almost was like she did it on purpose. It was like she knew what she was doing, which was even worse. But why we're taking this second to pause and talk about the little YouTube drama, I've been seriously thinking about reading to you guys in the voices as well. So we have some fairy tales, and I can read in the rather dark sometimes. I have a Not in a Fairy Tale book, and then I have The Land of Stories, a treasury of classic fairy tales. I'm going to read it for you guys a little bit. Some ASMR reading. Since we're talking about crime, let's go to a good crime story. It's a fairy tale. I believe that is 136. I'm gonna have to turn on the light. I thought I could do it. I can't do it. I can't. I'm gonna have to turn it around though, because I look horrible. And there's a towel over there, so don't mind the towel. I'll turn it back in just a second. I went too far. Alright. Alright, I'm gonna turn this back on. Because I can see from the light of YouTube that. Put that up like that. Alright. Ready? Here we go. Once upon a time, there was a little boy who lived on a farm with his family. They were an organized bunch, and each family member had his or her own set of chores to keep the farm running. His father farmed all the crops and sold them to the local village. His mother cooked and cleaned and made sure everyone was well, and putting I can't see, you guys. I can't see. I gotta turn the light on, but I don't want to turn the light on. Maybe if I need one of them book lights. I got my glasses, so I need to put on my glasses. I'm gonna go over here and turn this light on so I can read properly for you guys. I'm cleaning my glasses right now. while I read. Where was I at? His mother cooked and cleaned and made sure everyone else was pulling his or her own weight. His brothers fed the chickens and the pigs and kept the pig pens and hen houses clean. His sisters milked the cows and goats and carefully kept track of which milk was which. Being the youngest of his family, the little boy was given the simplest task of the farm. Every day he would take the farmer's herd of sheep into a field nearby and look after them as they grazed on the grass. At night, when his mother rang the bell for supper, he'd escort the sheep back into their pen, and the whole thing would start over again the next day. It was such an easy chore that the little boy spent most of the day being bored and restless. Even with a good imagination, it was difficult to keep himself entertained in the field. He had practiced balancing his straw hat on the end of his staff, but he grew tired of that. He looked for ant hills to stomp on them until all the ants came out, but they got pretty old pretty quick. And he built buildings out of rocks, but eventually he ran out of rocks. One afternoon, he had done everything he could to think of to pass time. He decided to play a joke on his family. "Wolf!" he cried. "There's a wolf in the field!" His father and his brothers immediately came running from the farm with pitchforks and axes raised high. His mothers and sisters ran out too, swinging rolling pins and carving knives. However, when they arrived in the field, there wasn't a wolf anywhere. The little boy burst out in a fit of giggles. "Ha ha ha ha! I tricked you," he laughed. "There's no wolf out here. You should have seen the look on your faces." His siblings rolled their eyes, and they went back into the farm. His parents shook their heads and scowled at him. The little boy figured that he was the only one in the family who had a sense of humor. Hi, Max Kober, how are you? I'm reading tonight. I hope you're enjoying. Can you guess what story we're reading? Okay, well, I forgot myself. Okay. The next day, the little boy was back in the field watching over a flock of sheep, as always. He was so bored he didn't know what to do with himself. He practiced twirling his staff, but it kept hitting in the back of the head. He laid on the grass and thought about the clouds and what the shapes were like. But there was only one or two in the sky that day. He tried teaching the sheep tricks, like how to fetch and roll over, but the sheep weren't interested in learning. Finally, he was so desperate for excitement that he decided to play another joke on his family. "Wolf!" he cried. "There's a wolf in the field!" Just like the day before, his family ran toward the field with pitchforks, axes, rolling pins, and knives raised. But before they reached the field, the little boy fell and rolled on the ground, belly aching, inducing laughter. "I tricked you again," he said. With a giggle, his parents and sibling were at their wits' end with him. Even the sheep were annoyed because the little boy frightened them each time that he yelled. "I'm glad you're pleased with yourself, because the rest of us sure aren't," his father said. "Scare us like that again, and you'll get a whipping." The little boy was so tickled with himself, he laughed until it was time to head back for supper. Unfortunately, the next day, the joke was on him. Just like always, the little boy was back in the field, watching the sheep. He was walking around, looking for something to do, when out of the corner of his eye, he saw a frightening sight. At the edge of the field were a pack of enormous wolves.
They had thick, matted fur, long claws, and razor-sharp teeth. Their mouths watered, and they licked their lips as they watched the little boy and his herd. The sheep saw the wolves and quickly ran from the field, causing a small stampede. The little boy was left alone, and the wolves began circling him. He was so scared he froze where he stood, and it took him a few moments before he was able to make a sound. Wolves! He cried. There are wolves in the field! However, his family didn't come. Wolves! He cried louder. There are wolves in the field! A whole pack of them! Still, no one from the farm came to save him. Wolves! The boy cried as loud as he could. Come quick before they eat me! His family heard him loud and well, but they thought he was only trying to trick them again. They shook their heads and continued their chores. The whole wool pounced on the little boy and gobbled him up. The family didn't realize what had happened until supper time, when the boy didn't return from watching the sheep. They went to the field to see what was keeping him, but all that was left was his staff and his straw hat. Naturally, it was devastating for the family and all the villagers who knew him. With the family's permission, the village built a monument for the little boy in the center of the town. It reminded the other children in the village the importance of honesty and having an honorable reputation. Even little white lies cause big trouble. The end. That was The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Shall I continue? Shall we keep going? Did you like that? Can I get a simple something? Oh, hello, Save Robbie. Hello. I hope you're having a fabulous evening. We are doing storybook readings in my voices. I just got done reading The Boy Who Cried Wolf. I think it's quite appropriate for a scary story on a night like this. Let's see, another story. Let's see, I've said The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Let's see. Should we read Billy Goat Scruff? Oh, thank you so much, dear. Thank you so much. I'm trying to find a good story to read. Let's see, I've got Little Bo Peep. I want to read kind of a scary one. That one was a good scary one. That one was very, very scary. And these can shape what you dream like. Let me tell you that. Let's see. What is that one? Is it Rumpelstiltskin? Is that one a scary one? I think that one is a scary one. Let me see. Rumpelstiltskin is a very scary one. Okay, thank you, Robbie. Thank you so much for dropping in. Thank you. We're going to have story time. Come back anytime. I'll be reading quite a few. Have a great night. Thank you so much. Rumpelstiltskin. Once upon a time, there was a young maiden who was the most talented spinner in the village. She lived at home with her father, who worked as a miller. The miller was proud of his daughter. She was all he ever talked about. In fact, some of the villagers grew tired of him bragging about her.
One night, while he was getting drinks with his friends at a tavern, he went on about how gifted his daughter was, and that he'd been served too much and was making outlandish claims that he wouldn't have made if sober. My daughter is a brilliant spinner. She could spin hay into gold, he said. Get a drink, hold on. The other men at the tavern raised their drinks to Miller and his daughter. Despite their constant boasting, it was charming to see him and such a supportive father. He never expected that singing his daughter's praises would put her in harm's way. Unfortunately, the king's soldiers happened to be drinking at the tavern that night. Neither the king nor the soldier had any sense of humor whatsoever. When he learned about the maiden who could spin hay into gold, the soldier turned quite seriously. And since the kingdom was experiencing the worst financial trouble since the Dark Ages, he thought that the maiden was the answer that he'd been looking for. The soldier raced back to the castle and woke the king to tell him the fortunate news. "Your Majesty, something wonderful has happened," the soldier said. "There is a young maiden in the village who has been blessed with the power to spin gold into hay." Or spin hay into gold. Reverse that, my bad. "She must be a witch!" the king exclaimed. "We must arrest this woman at once and burn her at the stake." "Actually, Your Highness," the soldier said, "I thought a young woman like her would be most useful to the kingdom. In a time like this, if she spun enough hay into gold, we would become the wealthiest nation in the world." "You're absolutely right," the king said. "In order to find his maiden and bring her back to castle at once, we will put her to work straight away." The soldier organized a squad and charged into the village. They knocked down the miller's door and seized the maiden. The soldiers carried her off to the castle. She was locked in a tower with nothing inside but a spinning wheel and a stack of hay. The maiden couldn't have been more frightened and confused. The king entered the tower and she bowed to him. "I beg your pardon, your Majesty," the maiden said. "But what is the meaning of this?" "Word of your abilities has reached the castle," the king told her. "While we should punish you for keeping such a gift from our attention, we have brought you here to redeem yourself." "Excuse me?" she said. "What abilities are you referring to?" "You have been blessed with the power of spinning hay into gold," the king said. "And now you shall do it for me." "Your Majesty, I believe there's been some kind of mistake," the maiden said. "I'm a very gifted spinner, but I certainly cannot spin hay into—" "Do not lie to me. I heard from your father's lips," the king said. "I will spin the hay in this tower into gold by sunrise tomorrow morning, or your head shall be chopped off." The king promptly turned his heel and left. The maiden was locked in the tower alone. She fell on the floor and sobbed hysterically, as if she were living a nightmare. There's no way she could accomplish what the king had ordered. For all she knew, such a thing was impossible. Just when she thought she must suddenly lose her head, a small whirlwind spun around the tower, and a dwarf magically appeared.
Hello, fair maiden, the dwarf said. It seems you found yourself in quite a predicament.
Who are you? She asked.
The question isn't who, but what,
the dwarf said. Then what are you?
I may be your salvation, he said. The king expects you to spin all the hay in this tower into gold by morning. Is that correct?
Yes, but he is mistaken, the maiden said. I've never been capable of such a thing. He must have misunderstood what my father said. Tomorrow morning, when the king finds the tower so full of hay, I will lose my head for it. The dwarf excitedly rumbled his hands together.
Lucky for you. Spinning hay into gold is one of my specialties. I'd be willing to help you if you'd like.
Yes, of course, the maiden said. I would be so grateful. I don't do
anything for free, the dwarf said. I will only spin the hay into gold if we make a trade.
The maiden didn't have much to offer, but she was willing to trade anything if it would save her life. The dwarf looked her up and down and then side to side.
I'll do it in exchange for your ring, he said.
But the ring is my mother's, the maiden said. I could never part with it. It's the ring.
It's the ring or your head, he said. What do you choose?
It was an easy choice. The maiden quickly took the ring off her finger. Where did I go? And handed it over to the dwarf. The dwarf kicked his feet up and down happily with a little jig. Nothing made him happier than that trade. He sat at the spinning wheel and went to work. The maiden watched in amazement as the dwarf did the impossible. In just a few hours, the entire haystack had been transformed into a glimmering pile of gold. Thank you so much, the maiden said. I didn't get your name. Instead of answering, the dwarf snapped his fingers and disappeared from the tower. Shortly after sunrise, the king stormed in to check on the maiden's process. He looked around the tower in awe. Although he had given the order, even though he was impressed to see what happened. I spun the hay into gold just as you wished, the maiden said. May I please go home? The king didn't answer. His soldiers took hold of the maiden and covered her into a large chamber in the castle. It was 4 times the size of the tower, and he continued nothing but a spinning wheel and a number of stacks of hay.
I dropped you guys. It's alright, I got you back. We're alright. We're alright. I didn't lose my spot. Where are we? Okay. Hold on. I lost my spot, you guys. Oh no, it turned. No! What? Hold on. No! How does that happen? I was just there. Okay, there we go. Hold on, I think I found it. Where are we? Exchange you for your ring. May I please go home? 4 times the size of the tower, contaminated nothing but the spinning wheel and a numerous stacks of hay. Okay, there we go. Now you will spin this hay into gold by sunrise tomorrow, or your head will be cut off, the king said. With these new orders given, he and the soldiers left the chamber and locked the poor maiden inside. The maiden was beside herself with sorrow. How was she going to spin the hay into gold? It would be a challenge even if she was capable of such an act. Luckily, another whirlwind spun around the chamber and a magical dwarf appeared once more. "At it again, I see," he said with a wink. "Will you help me spin this hay into gold again?" the maiden begged. "If not, I will surely lose my head tomorrow at sunrise." "But I never do anything for free, especially if I've done it before," the dwarf said. "I'd be happy to help if we come to an agreement." Once again, the dwarf looked at the maiden up and down and inside the side. "I'll do it for your necklace," he said. "But this necklace belonged to my grandmother," she said. "I could never give it up." It'll be hard wearing a necklace without a head," the dwarf pointed out. "Fair enough," the maiden said. She handed over her grandmother's necklace, and the dwarf went to work spinning the hay into gold. By the time the sun rose the following day, the chamber was filled with glittering stacks of gold. "Thank you," the maiden said. "But wait, I didn't get your name." Instead of answering, the dwarf wiggled his ears and disappeared. Just after sunrise, the king and his soldiers barged into the chamber and were very pleased for what they saw. "I've spun the hay into gold just as you asked," the maiden said. "Now will you please let me go home?" The king didn't answer. The soldiers took the maiden by the arms and led her down a dark staircase into the castle dungeon. The dungeon was filled from the floor to the ceiling with mounds of hay. "If you spin this hay into gold by sunrise tomorrow, the kingdom shall be the richest country in the world, and I shall make you my queen," the king said. "If not, you shall lose your head." The king and his soldiers left the dungeon and locked the maiden inside. She was overwhelmed with fear. The task seemed impossible. Even if the dwarf appeared again, he most certainly wouldn't be able to spin all of the hay in the dungeon into gold by sunrise. Another whirlwind spun around her. The dwarf appeared in the dungeon. "We have to stop meeting like this," he said. I'm starting to think the king just wants me dead," the maiden said. "There isn't enough time to spin all this hay into gold, even for you." "But the greater trade, the faster I work," he said. "But I have nothing left to give you," the maiden said. "For now," the dwarf said, with a twinkle in his eye. "But if you give me But if you give me your firstborn child, I will spin all this hay into gold by sunrise. It will it It was the most obscene idea the maiden had ever heard. If she had had a child one day, she could never give it to the dwarf. What a cruel thing to suggest, she said. It's a child or the executioner's axe, the dwarf said. Take it or leave it. The maiden was so exhausted she wasn't thinking straight. More than anything, she just wanted the nightmare to be over. Fine. If you spin all the hay in this dungeon into gold, I will give you my firstborn child, she said. The dwarf laughed wildly and did cartwheels around the dungeon. To date, it was the greatest trade he had ever made. He sat behind the spinning wheel in winter work. The longer he spun the hay into gold, the faster he went. Soon the entire dungeon was filled with the gleaming stacks of glitter. You have saved my life again, the maiden said. But I didn't get your name. Instead of answering, he scrunched his nose and disappeared from the dungeon. The king and all his soldiers returned at the sunrise and were shocked to see all the gold in the dungeon. Hold on. Even the king had thought the task would be impossible. I apologize for threatening your life, but we were most desperately in debt, the king exclaimed. But now, thanks to you, we will have the richest kingdom in the world. Please rule it alongside me as my queen. The circumstances were very bizarre, so the maiden had to think this proposal over. She either returned to the father who had almost gotten her killed, or married the man who had almost had her killed. Either way, it was a complicated future. But when she compared the life of the queen to the life of the miller's daughter, the maiden found it was an easy choice. Thanks to the kingdom's newfound wealth, the king and the maiden had an extravagant royal wedding. The maiden became queen and was never forced to spend anything ever again. She enjoyed her new life as queen so much she forgot all about the magical dwarf she had a debt she owed him. Within a year, the queen was pregnant with an heir to the husband's throne. She gave birth to a beautiful baby princess, and the kingdom rejoiced. Unfortunately for the queen, the dwarf had not forgotten about their agreement. He returned to the castle, ready to collect at the end of his bargain. The princess is mine, he said. No, you can't take her, the queen said. A deal's a deal, the dwarf said. You wouldn't be queen if it wasn't for me. Now hand over the child, or I'll tell the king who really spun all that hay into gold. Please, there must be something else I can give you, the queen said. I can give you riches and jewels beyond your wildest dreams. I could give you the land and the title. I could make you a knight, a lord, a duke. The child is all I'm interested in. The stubborn dwarf said, However, if you can guess my name, I will let you keep the child. The queen guessed all the names she knew. Is it John, Michael, or William? She asked. Nope, the dwarf said. What about Harold, Robert, David? Not even close. The queen guessed every name from Adam to Zechariah, but none of them was correct. The dwarf squealed in delight, watching her agonize over it. "You'll never guess it," he said. "Give me the child." "Wait, at least let me have until the end of the week," she pleaded. "Just one more week and I will give you my daughter." The dwarf was certain she would never guess his name, and since he enjoyed watching her struggle so much, he agreed to give her one more week. As soon as he left, the queen sent for her royal guard. "Yes, your majesty," the guard asked. "I have a very important task for you. One that the king must never know about," she instructed. "This is a dangerous dwarf living in the kingdom who is trying to take the princess. I want you to find him and learn his name. And if we know what he's called, the princess will be saved." In all his years of service at the castle, this was by far the strangest task the guard had ever been assigned. He spent the whole week searching the kingdom for the dwarf, asking everyone from the young to the elderly if they had seen such a person. Finally, he was pointed in the direction of a strange woods where the dwarf lived. He found the odd little man singing and dancing around the large fire. "The queen is sure to lose this game, for Rumpelstiltskin is my name." The dwarf sang joyfully. "Rumpelstiltskin," the guard said. "That's it. That's his name." The guard raced back to the castle and told the queen what he had seen and heard in the woods. At the end of the week, the dwarf returned to the castle, grinning from ear to ear, certain he would be leaving with the young princess. "Today's your last chance, your highness," he said. The queen knew better than to come right out and say his real name, so she guessed the most ridiculous name she could think of to appear as genuine as possible. "Is it Pickled Phil? Is it Slim Butter or Jekyll Debbie?" "No, no, no," the dwarf sang. "Is it Fizzleby, Wankadoodle, or Horsequit?" "Wrong, wrong, wrong," the dwarf replied, laughing. "What about Crystal Limpkins, Luffy Flintins, Quenchty Simpkins?" The dwarf roared viciously with laughter. As far as he was concerned, he had already won. "You'll never get it right," he said. "Now give it up and hand over the princess." "Wait, allow me one final guess," the queen said. "Just one more guess and the princess will be yours." "Fine, fine, fine," the dwarf said. "One more guess and then hand her over." "It is Rumpelstiltskin?" the queen asked. The dwarf's mouth dropped open. He couldn't believe the queen had guessed his name correctly. No one had ever guessed his name correctly. He hopped around the castle in a furious rage, and then he disappeared. The queen raised her daughter at the castle in peace, and they never saw Rumpelstiltskin again. The end. Bet you didn't know that story, did you? Did you guys like that one? That was Rumpelstiltskin. All right, we're going to read. I think we're going to try to read 2 more. If y'all are still down for it. If not, that's fine. But I'm going to keep going. Because if not, Betty can read back and listen to these. And all right. So that was a pretty long one. I didn't realize how long that one was. I'm going to read some of these off. Leave a comment if you want me to read them. We've got, how about Hansel and Gretel? Sorry, we're going to read Hansel and Gretel. All right. Are we ready? What voice should we do for Hansel and Gretel? Should we do a creepy voice? Once upon a time. Should we do a British voice? Should we do an evil voice? Once upon a time, there was a brother and sister named Hansel and Gretel. They lived with their father and stepmother in a small cottage at the edge of the woods. Their father was a good man who loved his children more than anything else in the world. His wife, however, was a mean and selfish woman who became jealous of the affection her husband showed his children. The father was a woodcutter, and he did all he could to provide for his family. But due to a recent famine spreading across the land, times were hard for the peasant families in the kingdom. Food was scarce, and many worried about surviving the approaching winter. "If we don't do something, we'll starve," the wife told the woodcutter one night before bed. "We barely have enough food for the two of us. We must get rid of Hansel and Gretel if we want to survive." "I could never get rid of my children," the woodcutter said. "They mean everything to me." "It'll be easy," said the wife, who had already devised a plan. "Tomorrow we'll take Hansel and Gretel deep into the forest and leave them there. They're so young, they won't be able to find their way home. They'll get lost, and a hungry pack of wolves will find them, and we'll never have to worry about feeding them again." "I would rather starve than abandon my children," the woodcutter said. "I wouldn't hear another word of this. We will find another way to get through the winter." Despite her husband's wishes, the wife was convinced her plan was the only solution. Luckily, Hansel and Gretel were still awake and heard their father and stepmother's conversation through the thin walls of their cottage. "What will we do, Hansel?" Gretel asked her brother. "Our stepmother will surely try to abandon us in the woods while father is away chopping wood tomorrow." "Don't fret, Gretel," Hansel said. "I'll gather white pebbles tonight while they sleep and create a trail to follow back home." So Hansel snuck out while his father and stepmother slept and gathered as many white pebbles as he could find. The next morning, once the woodcutter left to chop the trees down, his wife led the children into the woods. "Where are we going?" Gretel asked. "To collect firewood," their stepmother said. "Now be quiet and follow me." She led them deep into the heart of the forest, further than Hansel and Gretel had ever gone before. Hansel dropped a white pebble every few steps, leaving a trail behind them. They traveled the whole day and came to a stop just as the sun began to set. "Now look around here and help me gather wood," their stepmother said. But before she finished her sentence, she dashed back into the direction from which they had came, leaving their stepchildren all alone in the woods. Hansel and Gretel followed the trail of white pebbles to their cottage. The forest became so dark after nightfall. The small white stones were the only thing they could see. But by the time they returned, their father was worried sick about them. "Thank the Lord you're all right," the woodcutter said, and embraced his children tightly. "Where is your stepmother?" To Hansel and Gretel's surprise, they had arrived home before their stepmother. Without a trail of pebbles, the woodcutter's wife had a hard time navigating through the woods and returned several hours later, after her stepchildren. She was furious to see that Hansel and Gretel had found their way back to the cottage. "What happened?" the woodcutter asked his wife. "We went to retrieve firewood," the wife said. "I turned my back for 1 minute and they were gone." "I pray it doesn't happen again," the woodcutter said. "Don't worry, it won't," the wife said, and glared at her stepchildren when her husband wasn't looking. That night, the wife locked Hansel and Gretel in their room so they couldn't sneak out to collect any more white pebbles. "Oh, Hansel, what will we do now?" Gretel asked her brother. "Our stepmother will surely abandon us again tomorrow." "Don't fret, Gretel," Hansel said. "Tomorrow morning at breakfast, we'll save our crust of bread and use breadcrumbs to make a trail." Just as predicted, as soon as their father left the next morning, their stepmother led Hansel and Gretel back into the woods. They walked even longer this time, traveling further into the trees than ever before. Hansel left crumbs behind them as they went and nearly ran out by the time they stopped. "Now gather up some wood," their stepmother said. Once again, she dashed back toward the cottage and left Hansel and Gretel all alone in the woods. It was so late that Hansel and Gretel decided to sleep in the woods and wait for the morning to follow the breadcrumbs home. Unfortunately, by the time they woke, the morning birds had eaten all the breadcrumbs they had left behind. Hansel and Gretel walked through the woods in what they hoped was the right direction. But there were so many trees it was impossible to tell. They walked for hours and hours. After finding a familiar part of the forest, they finally found a friendly white bird and followed it through the woods, hoping it might lead them home. The longer they followed the bird, the more of a wonderful aroma filled the air. It was a sweet smell, as if something delicious was baking in the oven nearby. Hansel and Gretel came upon a clearing in the middle of the woods. They were delighted to see, in the center of the clearing, a house made entirely of food. 1 second. It had gingerbread walls, a fence made of candy canes, and a garden of gumdrop shrubs. The roof was covered in frosting, and the windows were made of clear sugar panes. "I've never seen something so delicious," Gretel exclaimed. She and her brother dashed towards the house and began eating it. They were so hungry and tired from their journey, they didn't even think to ask the resident for permission. Suddenly, the door of the home opened, and a kind-looking old woman stepped outside. "Who's there?" the woman said. "What are you doing to my house?" "Please forgive us," Hansel said. "We were hungry and lost in the woods when we found your home." The old woman smiled at them, showing rotting teeth behind her wrinkled lips. "I didn't realize you were children," she said happily. "No need to apologize, my dear. I built a home out of food for children, just like you. Please eat as much as you'd like." Hansel and Gretel were certain the old woman must be an angel in disguise. They ate the candy cane fences and gumdrop shrubs. They ate the sugar pane windows and licked all the frosting off the roof. By the time Hansel and Gretel were full, they'd eaten everything but the gingerbread walls. "Now come inside and rest, my dears," the old woman said. "There are more goodies and soft beds waiting for you." Hansel and Gretel eagerly did as the old woman requested, knowing they could use the rest after their journey through the woods. However, when they went inside, there were no goodies or beds to be found, only a large cage and an enormous oven. The old woman threw Hansel and Gretel in the cage and locked the door. She took off the mask of the old woman, and the children saw what the rest of her was as rotten as her teeth. She wasn't a sweet old woman at all, but an ugly old witch. "One of you shall be my dinner, and the other shall be my slave," the witch crackled. "That'll teach you not to wander in the woods alone." The witch pulled Gretel out of the cage and handed her a broom. "Sweep the house, girl," the witch ordered. "I want a clean home before I eat my meal." Not having much choice, Gretel swept the house until it was spotless. The witch lit a fire in the oven and then pulled Hansel out of the cage. "You shouldn't eat me yet," Hansel pleaded. "I'm too thin and frail to make a meal, but if you keep feeding me, soon I'll make a feast." The witch scratched the hairs on her chin and thought it over. "That's an excellent idea," the witch said. "I shall keep feeding you until you outgrow the cage, and then I shall have my first winter meal." For weeks and weeks, the witch forced Hansel to eat delicious sweets, while Gretel was forced to clean inside and outside the house. At the end of every day, the witch would peer into the cage and squint at Hansel. "Are you pleasingly plump yet?" the witch asked. Hansel assumed the witch must have had bad vision. Otherwise, surely she could see that his clothes were much tighter than before, and he grew rounder and rounder each day. He quickly thought of a way to use the witch's failing eyes to save his life. "I'd make a decent bite, but not enough to serve your appetite," Hansel lied. The witch huffed and puffed and ordered Gretel to cook her a rat stew for dinner. The next day, as Gretel was cleaning up leaves outside the house, she put a couple of sticks in her pocket. Later that night, she slid them into Hansel's cage, just before the witch peered inside. "Are you reasonably round yet?" the witch asked. "He's as thin as he's ever been," Gretel said. "Hansel, hold out your hands so the witch can feel your bony fingers." Gretel nodded to the sticks that she had given him, and Hansel knew what to do. He held one stick like it was a part of his hand, and the witch felt it. She moaned and groaned and ordered Gretel to prepare spider soup for her supper. Hansel and Gretel didn't know how much longer they could continue tricking the witch. They knew she was growing impatient because the next day she peered into the cage, even before the sun had set. "Are you finally fat?" she asked. I'm ample for snacking, but a full meal you'll be lacking," Hansel lied again. He'd held out his hand as if he'd done the night before. The witch felt the stick, and her face was bright red. "I've waited long enough," the witch snouted. "Fat or not, I will eat you tonight. Prepare the oven, girl." Gretel opened the wide door of the oven and filled it with firewood. She lit a match and heavily grew a fire inside. The witch stood behind her, with a sinister smile grew across her ugly face. "Now I want you to test and see if the fire is hot," the witch said. Gretel knew the witch was trying to trick her. She was going to eat both of them for dinner. "But I don't know how," Gretel said, thinking fast. "Will you show me what to do?" "Stupid girl," the witch said. "Move aside and I will show you. It's very simple. You just lean into the oven like this and touch the flames and you're... Ah!" Gretel pushed the witch into the oven with all her might and locked the door behind her. The witch screamed as she was cooked to a crisp. When her screams finally came to a stop, Gretel freed Hansel from the cage. Just before they escaped the house, Hansel found a vase full of rubies and diamonds the witch had kept on her shelf. He and Gretel filled their pockets with the jewels and ran into the woods. They ran far, far away from the witch's gingerbread house and never looked back. Eventually, they came to the edge of the woods and saw a familiar cottage. "Gretel, look, we're home," Hansel exclaimed. The woodcutter heard his children and rushed out to greet them. He was so overjoyed to see them, tears filled with his eyes, and they rolled down his face. Hansel and Gretel looked around at the cottage, but the woodcutter's wife was nowhere to be found. "Father, what happened to our stepmother?" Gretel asked. "The same day you went missing, she got lost in the woods, and a pack of wolves found her," he said. Betty's awake. "I was so worried that something had happened to you, but you're both alive and well, and all is right in the world. Hey, baby, did you wake up? Come here, baby." Well, you guys, that's the end of that. I'm going to have to get off here. Betty got up. I'm going to go put her back to bed. Thank you guys for reading The Land of Stories with me. We'll be back soon. You guys have a great night. Night-night. Sleep tight. And don't let the bed bugs bite. Bye-bye, you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining.